The story begins with two people locked in an intense sparring match. A sharp punch landed on an arm, and the force of the impact rippled throughout the entire training hall. The fighters were the protagonist and his training partner, engaged together in a brutal practice session. After taking several heavy blows, the protagonist's partner finally cried out, no longer able to endure the pain. He admitted that the punches were far too strong and praised the terrifying power behind the protagonist's attacks. Calmly, the protagonist replied that he had achieved a breakthrough to the micro level just 2 days earlier. This led to a brief explanation of the 5 levels of martial arts mastery that existed in this world: basic, proficient, micro level, mastered, and perfect. Upon hearing this, his partner was devastated. He said that no other student in their class could come close to the protagonist anymore, while the protagonist was still prepared to continue training. Exhausted, the partner begged him to stop for now. In the end, he gave up and left, calling the protagonist a complete maniac who thought of nothing but training. As he exited, he said goodbye to Teacher Lee, who calmly reminded him to put on his clothes before leaving. Teacher Lee then approached the protagonist with a serious expression and asked why the 30,000 enrollment fee still had not been paid. The protagonist lowered his head and asked for more time, explaining his family's situation. Teacher Lee sighed and said there was nothing he could do. After practice, the protagonist was left alone and continued training by himself. His heart felt heavy as thoughts of the unpaid fee repeatedly surfaced in his mind. He remembered that his parents had died when he was only 3 years old. Since then, he had lived with his aunt and uncle, who had always supported his path as a martial artist. In a world filled with monsters, becoming a martial artist was an extremely profitable career. Because of this, the protagonist felt deeply distressed about being a burden on his family. Even after relentless training, the protagonist returned to his small, modest apartment. Before entering, he overheard his aunt and uncle talking inside. They were struggling with rent, and there was little money left. Nevertheless, they decided to prioritize paying the protagonist's enrollment fee so that his future would not be delayed. To make this possible, his uncle considered stopping his medication, while his aunt planned to find a second job. Standing silently at the door, the protagonist heard everything, the sacrifices they were making for him. He raised his hand and slapped his own face, forcing a smile so his emotions would not show. He entered and greeted them as usual. His aunt immediately scolded him for coming home so late from training. The protagonist offered to massage his uncle, but was simply told to get proper rest. That night, the scene shifted to the protagonist's small room. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts in turmoil. After a long silence, he made a decision. He would solve everything on his own. If he needed money quickly, there was only one place that could provide it. The next day, the protagonist arrived at a modern building hidden beside a small forest. Beneath it lay an underground fighting arena, a place where the only rule was victory. The announcer's voice echoed throughout the venue as he introduced the fighter of the night, the Minotaur, the protagonist. To claim the 60,000 prize, he would need to win 4 consecutive matches. The crowd watched him and began whispering, thinking he was just a newcomer. The announcer advised him to hype up the audience. He hesitated, unsure of what to say, until the announcer explained that provocation was part of the show. Once he understood, the protagonist shouted that he would not lose, openly challenging anyone brave enough to face him. The audience was stunned by his audacity. Many believed he would be defeated easily, but his words ignited the atmosphere. Cheers and applause roared as the fight was about to begin. Amid the noise, the protagonist remained calm, focused solely on obtaining the prize money. The first opponent entered, a fighter wearing a rat mask. The protagonist observed carefully and immediately noticed a flaw in the opponent's stance. The masked fighter charged forward and threw a punch while the protagonist appeared distracted. In the next instant, the protagonist countered swiftly. His fist landed cleanly on the opponent's face, sending him flying to the other side of the ring. The match ended instantly. The protagonist claimed his first victory and wasted no time, immediately calling for the next challenger. The arena erupted with excitement, awed by the overwhelming strength of the Minotaur. The second fighter entered with contempt, claiming the protagonist's luck would not last. The protagonist gestured for him to attack, intending to test his own strength. The opponent charged without hesitation. The protagonist met the punch with his own fist, and a powerful shockwave burst through the air. The opponent's face turned pale in disbelief. The protagonist knew the truth. His strength had already surpassed this level. Seizing the moment, he delivered a heavy punch to the opponent's face. Noticing the opponent's excessive commitment and exposed waist, he followed with a brutal kick to the abdomen, sending the fighter flying out of the arena and ending the match. Just like that, the protagonist claimed his second victory with ease. He stood alone in the ring, waiting for the next opponent. Inside a luxurious private room, a man in a suit observed the scene. He closed his eyes and remarked that the Minotaur was far too strong for an apprentice. Seeing 3 consecutive victories, he decided to intervene. Quietly, he arranged the final registered match. At that moment, a masked fighter volunteered to enter the ring. The man gave a brief command, instructing him to conceal his true strength. Back in the arena, the protagonist maintained steady breathing. The previous fights had been effortless with his newly mastered fist technique, but he did not lower his guard. He knew that only one more victory stood between him and the 60,000 he desperately needed. Soon, the final opponent appeared. The crowd erupted when they recognized the challenger, the White Fox. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Whispers spread through the audience, calling him a quasi-martial artist, a level beyond ordinary fighters. For many, allowing such a match crossed the line. The protagonist understood the fight would not be easy, but retreat never crossed his mind. The White Fox approached with a faint smile, relaxed and confident. He told the protagonist not to worry, as he knew how to stop his punches. As both warriors took their positions, the announcer declared the final match. The bell rang, and they charged at each other. Without hesitation, the protagonist launched a full power punch. The White Fox met it head-on, blocking with his own fist. When their fists collided, the protagonist felt terrifying strength. His entire arm nearly trembled. He realized that the White Fox was not merely a quasi-martial artist. He had deliberately been suppressing his true power. The White Fox stared intently and took a deep breath. In the next moment, he unleashed the Thunder Fist, striking the protagonist directly. The impact was violent, and the shockwave surged through the protagonist's entire body. For the first time, he experienced the terrifying force of a true martial artist. In the audience, some recognized the technique and shook their heads, knowing the Minotaur stood no chance. The White Fox continued his assault, unleashing relentless punches while urging the protagonist to reveal his true strength. The protagonist could only defend himself. He knew that if this continued, defeat was inevitable. He searched for an opening, but the White Fox gave none. In a brief lapse in defense, a punch struck the protagonist's face. He was sent crashing to the ground, his vision blurred and his body unresponsive. His consciousness slowly faded as the roar of the arena dulled. The White Fox stepped forward, placing his foot on the protagonist's mask, coldly stating that the prize would not be his. He offered a deal. Join them, and he would get the money. The protagonist refused immediately. The White Fox's expression darkened as he warned that refusal came at a cost. Lying on the floor, the protagonist questioned their dignity as martial artists. Those words shattered the White Fox's last shred of patience. There was no reason to continue talking, so he decided to end it. He declared that he would cripple the protagonist so he would never fight again. As he prepared a powerful kick, the threat echoed in the protagonist's mind, along with memories of his dream and his family's sacrifices. At that moment, the White Fox charged with the finishing kick. At the last second, the protagonist moved and narrowly avoided the attack. The White Fox was shocked. Despite the brutal punishment, the protagonist stood up once more, surrounded by a blazing aura. As he slowly walked forward, he repeated that he would not fall here. The white fox was stunned. Despite everything, the protagonist was still standing. The protagonist thought of his family and all the sacrifices they had made for him. He knew he could not accept a future where he failed. Suddenly, a strange screen appeared before him, asking what he was willing to sacrifice for his faith and family. With a fierce roar, he answered without hesitation that he would sacrifice everything. A terrifying aura erupted from his body and spread violently. The screen asked again if he was prepared to pay the price. The protagonist shouted, "Yes." In the next instant, reality shattered, and he was transported to a strange, digital-like space. Before he could fully grasp what was happening, a massive shadow appeared before him. Moments later, a golden being emerged, radiating an oppressive presence. The being said it would grant him a chance. It slowly faded away, and a thread of golden light enveloped the protagonist. A golden system screen appeared, displaying his attributes, vitality, spirit, and martial skills. He touched the screen and selected the first mission option, a beginner tutorial, defeat the white fox and improve his martial arts. Before he could react, a clone identical to him appeared and immediately attacked. The protagonist relied on instinct to evade the punch. He noticed the clone was using the Vajra fist perfectly, exactly as described in the manual. He recognized it as a perfect instructor and knew he could not waste this opportunity. He charged forward and exchanged blows with the clone. He quickly realized the clone demonstrated the ideal combat form, suppressing him with precise control. The clone showed no mercy. A full power punch struck the protagonist's abdomen, forcing him back with immense force. As he steadied himself, he noticed something strange. His own fist technique was improving at an astonishing rate. A faint smile appeared on his face. He realized this place allowed rapid growth of his abilities. Without hesitation, he charged again, unleashing a barrage of punches in continued intense training. With every collision, his mastery of the Vajra fist increased. He switched to the void step, and its proficiency rose rapidly as well. In a very short time, he nearly reached the limits of his skills. Floating light palm was the first to break through to the micro level, followed by void step. In a decisive exchange, the Vajra fist advanced to the master level. The training ended, and the clone dissolved into fragments of light, leaving the protagonist exhausted and heavy. The system screen appeared again, congratulating him and asking if he wished to return to reality. He agreed. In the blink of an eye, he was back in the underground arena, standing directly before the white fox. Enraged, the white fox charged and unleashed all his power, launching the Thunder Rush fist to end the fight with a single blow. The protagonist easily avoided the attacks. To him, everything seemed to slow down. In the next instant, he moved. His speed was overwhelming, and his punch struck the white fox's face. The mask shattered and fell to the ground in pieces. The protagonist stood there, his gaze cold and resolute. The audience was stunned. They never expected such an outcome. The white fox fell, defeated. The match ended, and the protagonist stood alone in the ring. He looked at the announcer and calmly asked when the prize would be given. In the office, the arena boss turned pale. An apprentice who had mastered the Vajra fist was beyond all expectations. Interest lit up in his eyes as he ordered his subordinates to follow the protagonist and uncover his identity. After receiving the money, the protagonist left and walked through the dark streets. Before reaching home, he sensed danger and turned around. Someone was following him. The pursuers were shocked when he suddenly vanished from their sight. They panicked and searched frantically. Above them, hidden between narrow buildings, the protagonist concealed his presence. Once the danger passed, he safely reached the rooftop. When he returned home, his aunt and uncle were stunned by the money. They asked if he had stolen it. Calmly, he explained that Teacher Lee had helped him after recognizing his talent. He asked them to trust him. Seeing his confidence, they believed him. Their faces filled with joy as they spoke about his future. Later, the protagonist stood alone on the rooftop. He felt relief. The family's financial burden had been resolved. He thanked the system, but noticed something strange. Only his martial skills had changed. A notification appeared explaining that he could use martial value to enhance attributes. Without hesitation, he allocated the points to vitality. His vitality surged as power flowed through his body, surrounding him with a violent aura. Upon checking his status, he had reached the level of a quasi-martial artist. He continued increasing vitality. His wounds vanished and his strength soared. Overflowing with energy, the protagonist leapt across rooftops to test his enhanced body. He decided to verify his strength and went to the school. At the training field, he saw the combat testing machine. Standing before it, he chose to use only 70% of his strength. He launched a punch. It struck the machine, shattered the metal, and completely destroyed it. The protagonist froze, wondering if he would have to pay for the damage. The noise attracted attention, so he quickly left. Moments later, an elderly man in pajamas arrived and flew into a rage at the destroyed machine. He immediately assumed Chen Shan or Li Tu was responsible and vowed to teach the culprit a lesson at the start of class. The next day, all the students gathered in the gymnasium. While standing in line, the protagonist quietly asked why Chen Shan had been beaten. His friend whispered back that Chen Shan was said to be the one who had destroyed the tester outside the drill ground last night. He had refused to admit it, so the teacher punished him. The protagonist smirked to himself, thinking it was obvious that Chen Shan had simply been wrongly accused. Suddenly, the teacher shouted and ordered everyone to be silent. He announced that he had invited his former comrade in arms, a Tier 3 martial artist named Chen Tian, to teach them AC-rank martial art, the Thunder Rush Fist. Everyone was required to learn it. The students began whispering among themselves. One said it was his first time seeing a Tier 3 martial artist. Another said that even C-rank martial arts taught at outside dojos cost hundreds of thousands in tuition. The protagonist recalled that the Thunder Rush Fist had also been used by White Fox against him before, a punch with triple impact and truly terrifying power. If he wanted to learn such a martial art outside, even just the registration fee would cost several $100,000. He immediately decided to seize this opportunity. Chen Tian spoke and reprimanded the students. Fooling around was over. He would demonstrate the Thunder Rush Fist 10 times, from beginning to end, and how much they learned would depend entirely on them. Chen Tian began the demonstration. His footwork was precise, followed by a powerful punch as he explained the principles of the Thunder Rush Fist. The force behind his punch was fierce and dominant. At the basic level, the punch produced a sound like thunder. At the proficient level, 3 sounds could be heard. At the micro level, 5. At the mastered level, 7, which was his current level. And upon reaching the perfect realm, 9 sounds would be produced. However, he warned everyone not to aim too high. It would be enough if they could reach the basic level that day. With a loud shout, he announced the second demonstration and ordered everyone to follow along. The entire row of students moved in sync with Chen Tian. After several hours, most of them were completely exhausted. Some said they had learned nothing, others complained about the difficulty. Some even asked whether there was any hidden secret to the technique. The protagonist's friend was panting heavily, his body trembling from exhaustion. He asked how one was supposed to learn a C-rank martial art like this. When he turned to ask the protagonist what he had learned, he was shocked to find that the protagonist was no longer behind him. His attention was suddenly drawn by Chen Shan's laughter as he announced to their classmates that he had successfully reached the basic level. The protagonist's friend thought to himself that this must be why everyone called Chen Shan a genius. He really did learn quickly. The teacher proudly told Chen Tian that Chen Shan was the #1 genius of the school and asked whether he was interested in guiding him. Chen Tian replied that in another city, such a level would be considered ordinary. After the teaching session, the two of them left immediately. While walking down the stairs, Chen Tian told the teacher that the batch of students was not good, he felt as if he had come for nothing. The principal replied that it was already enough for someone to reach the basic level. Was he really expecting to find a top-tier genius? Chen Tian said that martial cultivation was extremely slow and that talent was crucial. The principal agreed and added that relying solely on effort without opportunity was completely impossible. Suddenly, they both froze when they heard consecutive booming sounds echoing through the area. They immediately searched for the source. Chen Tian recognized it as a 7-sound thunder rush fist. He was shocked. Was there such an expert in the school? The principal said that was impossible. He had never heard of such a person. But when he saw the uniform, he realized it was a student. Chen Tian cried out in disbelief. He had only taught for half a day, and a student had already reached the master level. The protagonist performed the thunder rush fist again. This time, 9 sounds echoed out. The two of them were rooted to the spot. The teacher could not believe it and asked whether his hearing was mistaken. 9 sounds. Chen Tian trembled as he watched. He smiled and said that now he understood everything. He gathered energy into his fist, which became wrapped in orange-colored lightning, and unleashed his own thunder rush fist. 8 sounds rang out, the sound he had long yearned for. The teacher realized that Chen Tian had broken through. Chen Tian happily said that the thunder rush fist he had seen earlier had given him inspiration. Without it, he might never have broken through in his entire life. They immediately jumped down to search for the student, but to their shock, the person was no longer where he had been. The scene shifted to the protagonist walking home. He had not expected cultivating a C-rank martial skill to be so exhausting, far worse than the D-rank Vajra fist. His thunder rush fist had already reached the perfect realm. What he needed next was to find a way to earn martial value and break through as a martial artist as soon as possible. As he checked his system status, he wondered whether martial value could be obtained not only through life and death battles, but also through ordinary sparring. While walking, he arrived at the Raging Thunder Dojo. Upon entering, he saw everyone training with spears. An acquaintance approached and asked why he was there. The protagonist replied that he had just come by to practice. Suddenly, a man kicked one of the trainees. With irritation on his face, he demanded to know whether the student dared to say that his teacher taught poorly. If the student's comprehension was weak, he should admit it instead of making excuses. The protagonist asked what was going on. The acquaintance whispered that the dojo had a new instructor, extremely strong, but disdainful of ordinary people and careless in teaching. His disciple, Li Yan, was also very powerful. Li Yan spoke mockingly as he prepared to punch, saying that someone at this level actually dared to challenge him. Before he could strike, the protagonist grabbed him and said that was enough. Li Yan angrily demanded to know who he was and ordered him to let go. If he had the guts, they should enter the arena and fight one-on-one. The protagonist agreed. But suddenly, the dojo instructor shouted that class was starting. Li Yan snorted and walked away, yelling that the protagonist was lucky. The protagonist watched him with a dark expression and thought that the man was extremely arrogant. The leader began speaking, saying that this would be the last day he taught the Raging Sea Spear technique. Old rules. It would only be demonstrated once. The leader swayed, raised the spear, and looked at the students with mockery. He did not believe anyone would learn it. The protagonist watched every movement seriously. It felt as if his eyes were reflecting the movements directly into his mind. After the demonstration, the leader slammed the spear down and turned away, saying that how much they learned depended on them. Once the door closed, everyone complained. It was shown only once, and they had not even seen it clearly. Meanwhile, the protagonist's determination burned fiercely. He grasped the spear and thought that the essence of the technique was like a dragon roaring through the sea, its momentum like endless waves. He began to swing the spear, and blue energy flowed as his movements continued. His companions were stunned. It was as if he had already learned the technique. Someone asked what kind of prodigy he was, or whether they themselves were just truly incompetent. Suddenly, Li Yan came out and angrily demanded to know who was making noise and who had learned the technique. When he saw the protagonist, he stared seriously and realized that he truly had learned it. He decided to test the depth of his ability. The protagonist stopped his movements when Li Yan said he would guide him. The protagonist agreed. However, the acquaintance warned him that although Li Yan had a bad temperament, he was extremely strong. The protagonist told him not to worry. When the protagonist asked Li Yan to teach him, Li Yan shouted angrily and called him arrogant. He demonstrated the ringing sea spirit technique, micro-level, as his spear shone brightly. Meanwhile, the protagonist closed his eyes, exhaled, and softly said, "Ringing sea spirit technique, proficient level." Waves of energy enveloped him. Li Yan froze in shock and blurted out, asking how a proficient level ringing sea spirit technique was even possible. When the protagonist unleashed the raging sea spear technique at the proficient level, the blades of their spears collided head-on. The force of the impact sent out a deafening reverberation that shook the very air around them. Li Yan could hardly believe what he was seeing. In his mind, the protagonist was not yet a true martial artist, so how could he have reached the proficient realm of this technique in such a short time? Suddenly, the protagonist's eyes shone with a golden light. He swung his weapon with all his strength, and the sheer force sent Li Yan's spear flying away. At the same time, a golden notification appeared before the protagonist, announcing that he had defeated a martial artist. Despite his lower rank, his martial value increased and reached 35. The protagonist silently stared at the notification, lost in thought. Just as he had expected, even an ordinary sparring match could still grant martial value. In the future, he could look for more sparring partners to accelerate his growth. Meanwhile, Li Yan collapsed to his knees, repeatedly muttering that what had happened was impossible. Thinking it through, he immediately understood the situation. The raging sea spear technique had already reached the proficient realm. This realization filled him with extreme frustration. He himself had endured years of hardship and relentless training just to reach that level. Overwhelmed by emotion, he shouted out loud, questioning what meaning there was left in all his efforts. He suddenly stood up, fury burning as he clenched his fist and prepared to punch the protagonist. However, before his fist could land on the protagonist's face, a sharp voice rang out, stopping him in his tracks. Startled, Li Yan saw his master step between the two of them. Without hesitation, the master walked up to him and struck him hard across the face, followed by a cold reprimand. If he could not accept defeat, then what kind of martial artist was he supposed to be? Li Yan was left stunned. Meanwhile, the master stared at the spear embedded in the floor, deep in thought. He had demonstrated the technique only once, yet the protagonist had already mastered the raging sea spear technique all the way to the proficient realm. Even the so-called geniuses of the imperial capital of Magic City could not achieve something this exaggerated. The master grabbed Li Yan by the head and forced him to bow in front of the protagonist. In his heart, he admitted that Li Yan had talent, but he was far too arrogant. Being slapped awake by a genius of this level was not necessarily a bad thing. Turning to the protagonist, the master admitted that it was his own fault for not disciplining Li Yan strictly enough and apologized for what had happened. The protagonist was confused by the master's sudden change in attitude. Still, after the commotion ended and he left the place, he realized that the day had indeed been exhausting, but he had gained a great deal. Not only had he learned the Thunder Rush Fist and the Raging Sea Spear technique, but he had also earned martial value. As he walked home, he checked his status screen and thought about how to allocate the 35 martial value he had obtained. He remembered that there were only a few days left before the school exam. Wealthy students had already prepared high-end alloy weapons. He, too, needed to prepare his own weapon as soon as possible. In his opinion, he felt most comfortable using a long spear, and it would likely become his main weapon from now on. He needed to buy an alloy long spear. However, the little money he had was not even enough for his aunt's medical treatment, let alone an alloy weapon. He sighed deeply and wondered if there was any other way to earn money. As he walked, he suddenly stopped when he heard a television announcement from a convenience store about the Star City wilderness. Ferocious beasts were increasing in number every day. The city lord was calling on martial artists to hunt ferocious beasts in exchange for generous rewards. The protagonist asked himself whether he should leave the city to hunt ferocious beasts. After a while, he arrived home. Before he could even enter, he heard his aunt scolding his uncle. Hadn't little Hong already given them money the day before? Why did he still need to work so hard? His uncle replied that little Hong was still young, and it made no sense to rely on him to support the family. As long as he could still work, he needed to save up for their future. Their conversation was interrupted when the protagonist walked in and called out to them, saying that he was home. He immediately went to his aunt and suggested that he would take care of the household chores. However, his aunt told him to rest right away, as she always did. The protagonist did not argue. Gently, he took his aunt's hand and placed it on his uncle's back, saying that he was already capable of earning money now. There was no need for his uncle to go out and work anymore. It would be better for him to stay home and take care of his aunt. His uncle smiled warmly. It sounded nice, but he was not used to doing nothing. He even turned to the protagonist, smiled, and gave him a thumbs up, telling him not to worry. He only earned a little to cover daily expenses and did not push himself too hard. His aunt smiled in agreement and said that the protagonist would have even greater expenses in the future for martial arts training. They wanted to save as much as they could for him. The protagonist smiled faintly but did not reply. Deep down, he knew that his uncle and aunt were accustomed to hardship. Unless he earned enough to support them for a lifetime, they would never truly feel at ease enough to rest. He could not miss this opportunity to earn rewards by hunting ferocious beasts. After a while, he returned once again to his usual spot on top of the building. He knew that the wilderness was dangerous, so he needed to strengthen himself first. He invested all of his martial value into vitality. It rose to 95.2, and his body was surrounded by blazing red energy. In his mind, a vitality of 95.2 meant he was only one step away from becoming a true martial artist. After 2 days in the school gymnasium, at midnight, 10:40, his body drenched in sweat, the protagonist lay on the floor. Notifications appeared one after another. His Thunder Rush Fist, Raging Sea Spear Technique, Varja Fist, Floating Light Palm, and Void Step had all reached perfect. He had spent 2 full days in non-stop cultivation, pushing all of his martial skills to the perfect level. He was ready. It was time to leave the city. When Saturday arrived at the Star City martial artist base, he could not hide his excitement. He had finally arrived at a place he had previously only seen on television. Now, he was witnessing it firsthand. The martial artist base, where martial artists who were rarely seen elsewhere filled the streets. As he walked, he read the posted prices. 300 blue star coins for a non-ranked ferocious beast. 1,000 blue star coins for a Tier 1 initial stage ferocious beast. 3,000 for Tier 1 middle stage. 5,000 for Tier 1 high stage. When he read the next line, he froze. The left ear of the slain ferocious beast had to be cut off as proof to receive the reward. Otherwise, there would be no payment. He could not help but curse inwardly at how primitive the method was. While walking, he noticed a man asking a woman for help. He quickly calculated the possible earnings and realized that the bag the woman carried seemed to be filled with the left ears of ferocious beasts. Suddenly, however, his attention was stolen by a commotion behind him. A man shouting, ordering people to move aside, asking whether they couldn't see that the young master had arrived. The protagonist carefully observed the man and realized that his clothing and aura resembled the white fox from the underground boxing ring. He also heard whispers around him. If the man were not the nephew of the person in charge of the base, he would have been beaten long ago. Someone even said they had heard he was beaten badly by someone a few days earlier, and that it had been satisfying. Another person expressed disbelief, saying that must be why they hadn't seen him in recent days. The protagonist looked at the man again and saw him grinning back at him. He returned the same expression before immediately turning away. He knew that danger did not only come from ferocious beasts, but also from other people. He needed to be cautious. When he reached a large gate, the guard told him that he was young and looked like it was his first time going into the wilderness alone. The protagonist nodded in agreement and continued walking out. Watching him leave, the guard thought that he was just an ignorant and fearless kid. Stepping out of the passage, the protagonist set foot on grassy ground and looked over the forested surroundings. With firm determination, he swore to himself that he would return with a large haul. After 2 hours in the forest, the protagonist was frustrated and exhausted. He wondered why he had not encountered even a single ferocious beast. He began to suspect that the monsters near the forest's edge had already been cleared out, so he decided to go deeper inside. He ran forward quickly until he suddenly stopped. A white wolf appeared before him, its eyes glowing red and its body emitting a terrifying presence. The protagonist was not afraid. He immediately realized that this was likely the Tier 1 initial stage ferocious beast described in the books, the Nethermoon wolf. It was also his first time seeing such a creature alive. The wolf let out a loud howl and suddenly lunged forward. It leapt into the air, jumping even higher than him, fully prepared to attack. The Nethermoon wolf suddenly unleashed a terrifying and extremely powerful claw strike toward the protagonist. Its movement was fast and savage, as if it could tear the air apart in an instant. However, the protagonist avoided it immediately. He slightly bent his body, shifted to the side, and at that very moment rapidly gathered energy into his fist. His fist was wrapped in crackling golden lightning, and without hesitation, he punched with all his strength into the Nethermoon wolf's abdomen. The force of the impact almost echoed through the surroundings. A loud boom exploded in the air, and the wolf howled in pain. Driven by the overwhelming power of the punch, the Nethermoon wolf was sent flying backward and violently slammed into a large tree. When it fell to the ground, it was left with almost no life remaining. The protagonist quietly and solemnly observed the dying body of the Nethermoon wolf. The lightning had not yet completely dissipated. The golden lightning still lingered around his hands, flickering slowly. He smiled as he stared at his slightly trembling hand. At that moment, he realized what it truly felt like to fight monsters, more thrilling, more addictive, and more exciting than he had imagined. It was now clear in his mind that he could kill a Tier 1 initial stage ferocious beast in a single move. Because of this, he could not help but wonder whether he would be able to face a Tier 1 middle stage ferocious beast. While he was lost in thought, he suddenly felt the presence of watching eyes behind him. Only moments passed before a Tier 1 middle stage ferocious beast appeared, a gigantic raging black bear. Its eyes glowed red as it roared loudly, displaying its ferocity and preparing to attack. However, only a short moment later, an extremely loud sound echoed through the area. This was followed by the violent collapse of the massive black bear onto the ground. It lost its life before the battle could even properly begin. The protagonist realized that with his current strength, as long as he did not challenge a Tier 2 ferocious beast, he would not be in serious danger. He quietly observed the body of the raging black bear he had defeated using only a single lightning-wreathed punch. To claim the 3,000 currency reward, he took the bear's ear. At that moment, a notification appeared, a reminder that his accumulated martial value was sufficient for him to enter and break through as a martial artist, urging him to upgrade as soon as possible. The protagonist was delighted. At last, he could break through and become a true martial artist. However, before his emotions could fully settle, he suddenly sensed an extremely powerful and frightening aura. He immediately turned his head, and a question arose in his mind: what kind of ferocious beast was that? He immediately stood up and ran, wanting to discover the source of the aura he had sensed. When he got closer, he landed atop a large rock, and what he saw left him utterly shocked. A Tier 1 late-stage ferocious beast. What stood before him was a massive black jade giant python, its entire body surrounded by blazing energy. It was currently fighting several martial artists, and it was clear that they were barely able to withstand the beast's ferocity. With every attack from the gigantic snake, the martial artists were nearly knocked off the large rock, and two of those near the protagonist's position were violently slammed aside, almost shattering what they struck. The protagonist immediately grew alarmed when he noticed that he was about to become the beast's next target. Without hesitation, he moved at once. When the giant snake attacked, he leapt upward quickly. But before he could fully land, the black jade giant python violently swung its tail to launch another attack. The beast's movement was so fast that he could barely avoid it. With no other choice, he blocked the attack with his hands wrapped in golden energy. The force of the blow sent him flying backward, and he coughed up blood. He fell near the corpse of a martial artist who had been killed by the beast. That person's spear was stuck right in front of him. He slowly wiped the blood from his mouth, then grabbed the spear. Before pulling it out, he softly apologized to its owner, saying that he would borrow it for a moment. With full confidence, the protagonist faced the gigantic snake while holding the spear and prepared to fight it head-on. The black jade giant python moved again. It opened its mouth wide and charged straight at the protagonist, slamming its head into the ground with tremendous force. The protagonist managed to evade while quickly widening the distance. In his mind, he knew that it usually took the cooperation of several martial artists to kill a Tier 1 late-stage ferocious beast. However, his martial skills had been refined to perfection. He could kill a Tier 1 middle-stage ferocious beast like the raging black bear on his own. Even so, the black jade giant python was different. The protagonist retreated, braced himself with his foot, and kicked off a tree to leap high into the air. He used Void Step, Perfect, to gain sufficient height. While still in midair, he immediately activated the Raging Sea Spear technique, Perfect. The spear was wrapped in surging blue energy before he hurled it with all his strength. The spear struck directly and pierced through the body of the giant snake. It let out a scream of pain. At that moment, the protagonist immediately ran toward where the spear had landed, retrieved it, and wasted no time. He gathered blue energy once more, took a brief breath, and hurled the spear again with tremendous force. Once again, it pierced through the snake's body. However, the protagonist realized that the beast's body and defenses were far too massive. The difference in their sizes was simply too great, making it difficult to bring it down in a single blow. He would need to weaken it first before looking for an opportunity to deliver a fatal strike. Before he could fully retrieve his spear, the giant snake attacked again. It swung its massive tail, nearly hitting him. However, the protagonist used Thunder Rush Fist, Perfect, and punched the beast's body with all his strength before quickly retreating to retrieve the spear once more. While nearly gasping for breath, he watched the trembling body of the black jade giant python. He knew it was approaching its limit. Just a few more moves, and the battle would be over. He prepared himself again and aimed his spear. But suddenly, he sensed a presence behind him. He slightly turned his head and asked himself who it could be. Above him was a martial artist ready to attack, his fist wrapped in red energy. Unable to avoid it, he blocked with his arm. The force of the punch sent him flying backward. He forcibly stood up, his body trembling as he coughed up blood. As the group slowly approached, he asked who they were. The man in the center, the leader of the group, Master Yi, spoke. With a cold and heavy aura, Master Yi said that they had met again, and he demanded that the black jade giant python be handed over to him. While the protagonist was kneeling in front of the group, Master Yi looked at him with a hint of mockery. A faint smile appeared on his lips as he recalled the moment he saw the young man leave the city alone. In his mind, he was certain that the boy would die outside the walls due to the dangers waiting there. However, upon seeing him again, his mocking smile widened even more. He told the protagonist that he did not expect his luck to be this good, because not only did he survive, but he also encountered a wounded black jade giant python. As Master Yi spoke, his gaze shifted to the massive serpent, which was weakened and covered in wounds, with a marked sign pointing at it that indicated it was close to death. The protagonist looked up with shock evident on his face, sweat visible on his skin. He wondered if Master Yi's group had just arrived, judging by how he spoke about what the protagonist had obtained. In his mind, he quickly calculated the situation while looking at the 5 men surrounding him. Anxiety and seriousness could be seen in his eyes because he knew they were all martial artists. He understood that he was at a disadvantage due to their numbers and that he could not fight them head-on in his current condition. Suddenly, a large man wearing a mask charged forward and threw a punch while shouting angrily. He ordered the protagonist to leave, saying that his master, young Master Yi, wanted the giant serpent, and that the protagonist should leave as soon as possible. The protagonist lowered his head, trembling with anger. Intense hatred and determination were visible on his face despite the oppression he was facing. He suddenly stood up and released intense energy from his right hand, wrapping his fist in red and white lightning-like power. His eyes were burning with rage as he stared directly at his enemies. With courage, he said that his earlier defeat was only caused by a treacherous attack and asked them if they truly believed he could not defeat them. The protagonist unleashed a blazing punch with full force, striking the giant man's arm directly, resulting in a powerful impact surrounded by light and energy. The masked man was shocked, sweating heavily and unable to believe the terrifying strength possessed by the protagonist, which he had never expected from someone he considered weak. Due to the force of the attack, the large man lost his balance, and when the protagonist launched another punch, he was knocked flat onto the ground. His mask flew off, along with several teeth from his mouth. The protagonist remained serious and unwavering as he looked at his fallen opponent, while young Master Yi's group stood at a distance, watching their companion lying on the ground. Young Master Yi smiled with cunning as he observed the scene. In his mind, he acknowledged the protagonist as Minotaur, because of the powerful Vajra fist he had displayed. The protagonist showed confusion and unease on his face as he recalled a figure, a man wearing a white suit and a fox mask. A question formed in his mind as to whether this was the white fox he had previously fought. Young Master Yi then spoke with resentment and anger, stating that in front of so many people, the young man had brought him great humiliation, and that this was the first time anyone had ever done so. After that, he ordered his subordinates to kill the protagonist. They immediately obeyed and rushed toward him. Before he could be caught, the protagonist quickly grabbed his spear and ran into the forest. Those chasing him were left staring ahead with serious expressions, while someone shouted at them again to continue the pursuit. The group reached the forest, where their target seemed to disappear from sight. A man wearing a black mask and red jacket stopped while holding his massive sword. His expression showed irritation and confusion as he looked around and asked where their target had gone. Behind him were his companions, also serious and prepared for danger. One of them warned everyone to be cautious because the dense trees ahead made ambushes easy in such a place. While observing the surroundings, the masked man appeared to lose patience. Arrogance and disbelief were visible in his eyes as he questioned his companions about why they were afraid of just one person despite their numbers. However, at that very moment, he failed to notice that the protagonist had already appeared behind him. With glowing blue eyes, the protagonist moved swiftly like lightning, leaving only a streak of blue light in the air. A glance from his eyes revealed intense focus and a deadly gaze as he watched his victim. In an instant, the masked man collapsed to the ground, his face bloodied and unconscious. His companions were left stunned and overwhelmed by fear as they witnessed how quickly their comrade was defeated. Young Master Yi showed extreme shock and sweating as he wondered how their enemy could be so fast. Young Master Yi's subordinates could not believe what they were seeing. One of them shouted in fear and shock, stating that the technique used was the 9 Echoes Thunder Rush Fist. According to him, even Tier 3 martial artists could not train this technique to a perfect level. Due to the intense pressure and fear, Master Yi lost control of his emotions. Trembling, he angrily shouted for his subordinate to be quiet. He could not accept what was happening and repeatedly questioned how their enemy possessed both the perfect Vajra Fist and the perfect Thunder Rush Fist. His face was filled with despair as he realized the huge gap in strength between them and the young man they were pursuing. While the remaining subordinates were in chaos, the protagonist silently observed from atop a tree branch, holding his spear. He seriously considered his next move. He realized that if he had not exhausted his strength fighting a giant python earlier, he could have faced and crushed them directly. However, in his current state, he needed to be strategic and find opportunities to defeat them one by one. The protagonist moved again with incredible speed and power. He forcefully threw his spear into the ground, drawing all of his enemies' attention to that spot. Immediately after, the protagonist appeared in front of one enemy, his eyes glowing blue. A powerful knee strike hit the subordinate's head, causing him to be thrown back as blood burst from his face before he collapsed unconscious on the ground. Another companion, wearing a blue hoodie and holding a shovel, froze in fear as he stared at the bloodied body lying on the ground. Trembling, the man holding the shovel begged his master, young Master Yi, pleading that they needed to retreat immediately because the opponent was too strong. However, young Master Yi grew even more enraged and questioned whether his subordinate was joking by suggesting they run. His expression was filled with hatred, determined not to leave the area without ending the fight. Despite the danger, the protagonist charged again like an uncatchable shadow. Soon after, a man beside young Master Yi slammed heavily onto the ground. Young Master Yi was shocked by the protagonist's rapid attack on his subordinate. He did not expect such speed. Panting and sweating, he could not suppress his shock and irritation. His eyes burned with anger as he stared at his fallen companion, wondering how the protagonist had become this strong in just a few days. The protagonist appeared behind him again, and young Master Yi sensed it. When he turned around, he cursed in frustration as the figure vanished once more. He then focused on sensing his surroundings and felt that the protagonist was behind him again, preparing to attack. Before the strike landed, Master Yi launched a fast and tense counterattack, shouting that he would not be defeated so easily. He used his technique called void-breaking finger, releasing a sharp blue light from his finger. Determination and anger were visible on his face as he tried to track the protagonist with his eyes. However, the protagonist dodged quickly. Even in danger, his expression remained calm, as if he were simply reading his opponent's movements. Due to the power of the void-breaking finger, a massive tree was struck instead, causing it to be destroyed and wood fragments to scatter. Unable to hit the protagonist, Master Yi unleashed a series of attacks, repeatedly shouting the name of his technique. Each flash of blue light was swiftly avoided. Observing the power of the attacks, the protagonist wondered if it was a B-rank martial skill due to the damage it caused. A hint of amazement appeared in his eyes as he watched the traces of power. Driven by fear and desperation, Master Yi began making threats. With rage on his face and glaring eyes, he shouted that he had memorized his opponent's face and that if he were harmed, he would kill the protagonist's entire family once he returned. Upon hearing the threat, the protagonist's expression darkened and his blue eyes shone sharply as he stared at his enemy. The words about killing his family filled him with anger. He moved with incredible speed, leaving zigzag trails of blue light in his path. Master Yi boasted that his uncle was a supervisor at the martial artist base and was about to mention who his father was to intimidate his opponent, but he froze when the protagonist suddenly appeared behind him, eyes glowing blue and fist blazing with energy, ready to strike. As the protagonist stared at Master Yi with intense seriousness, his face showed no emotion, like an unbreakable wall, as he said that he preferred how his opponent looked when he was still arrogant. Master Yi could no longer speak as events unfolded too quickly. A powerful punch struck his face, releasing massive energy and seemingly slowing time due to the impact. The force sent Master Yi flying and plunging down the side of a cliff. His body crashed onto the ground below, creating a large explosion of dust among rocks and grass. As the dust slowly settled, his silhouette was seen kneeling, struggling to breathe. His hands pressed against the ground as blood dripped from his mouth and nose, staining the earth beneath him. Despite his injuries, Master Yi forced himself to look at the protagonist in disbelief. His eyes narrowed in pain and confusion as he asked why the protagonist was so strong. Shock and fear were evident on his face, as such power seemed impossible for someone not considered a martial artist. On the other hand, the protagonist stood upright, surrounded by a blazing red aura. His eyes glowed in the darkness, his face filled with intense anger. He firmly warned Master Yi that he should never have used his family as a threat. While kneeling, Master Yi shouted a question, asking what the protagonist truly was. However, behind him, he failed to notice the giant serpent preparing to attack. When he sensed it and turned around, it was already too late. A powerful strike from the python's massive tail killed him instantly. The giant serpent then let out a loud roar in front of the protagonist. Standing before the danger, the protagonist held his spear and faced the giant serpent bravely. Despite his determination, slight unease filled his mind as he observed the beast. He admitted to himself that he had taken too long dealing with Master Yi's group, allowing the giant python to recover its strength and stamina. Master Yi's men were deep within the forest, gasping for breath, wounded, and still unable to recover from the shock of what they had just witnessed. As they cautiously scanned their surroundings, one of them cursed under his breath, unable to hide his disbelief, repeatedly muttering that the boy was truly abnormal. Not far away, someone lay slumped on the ground, covered in blood and trembling, struggling to comprehend what had happened as he asked where young Master Yi was and whether that boy had really finished everything on his own. At that moment, the masked man was startled when the protagonist suddenly appeared from between the trees. The group immediately prepared for battle. One of Master Yi's men shouted angrily, challenging the protagonist and saying that he had finally shown himself. But before anyone could make a move, the protagonist shouted sharply, ordering an immediate retreat. Danger was coming. The ground suddenly shook. Leaves and soil exploded into the air as a colossal beast burst out from the depths of the forest. Everyone's eyes widened. Some screamed in terror. Amid the chaos, the protagonist moved, fast and without hesitation. At the exact moment he leapt away, one of Master Yi's men was suddenly swallowed by the giant snake, his scream of pain and fear echoing through the forest. At that point, the truth became clear. Even if indirectly, a martial artist had died. Instantly, the protagonist received 30 points of martial value. Before he could even process it, another of Master Yi's men was struck by the snake's powerful tail and died on the spot. Once again, the protagonist received another 30 points. In his mind, a new realization formed. It was actually possible to obtain martial value this way. As he continued to flee, he felt the snake's tail closing in rapidly. In a split second, he leapt into the air just before it struck. While airborne, memories of every battle he had endured flashed through his mind, his martial value steadily accumulating until he reached the point where a breakthrough was inevitable if he wanted to become a true martial artist. He jumped again, leaping from branch to branch, until he finally landed on a tall tree limb. That was when he realized he needed a safe place to carry out the breakthrough. He glanced back and smiled faintly. His decision was clear: the cave. From the tree, he descended swiftly, gripping his spear tightly. Below, the massive snake immediately followed. With a thunderous impact, the beast rammed its head into the cave entrance, shaking the surroundings and sending earth and stones exploding outward. Inside the cave, the protagonist quickly prepared himself and sat down in a stable position. Calmly, he observed the enraged snake's head forcing its way inside, desperate to reach him. Once he was certain he was safe, he opened his system. Before him appeared a clear blue panel displaying his name, along with all his stats: strength, spirit, physical body, techniques, talents, and current martial value. As the beast continued roaring in front of him, the protagonist's fingers moved rapidly. Again and again, he pressed vitality, urging himself to go faster. With every press, he felt his strength rise. In his mind, it was unmistakable. His vitality was climbing, and his entire body felt like it was burning. The blood in his veins no longer felt like blood, but flowing magma. Hot, heavy, and filled with power. Around him, signs of rising vitality appeared one after another until it finally reached 100 points. The moment it hit the peak, red energy burst from his body. Across from him, the giant snake recoiled. Its glittering eyes widened as it instinctively pulled back, sensing the sudden change in the presence before it. At that very instant, the breakthrough was complete. The protagonist officially became a martial artist, Tier 1. Surrounded by a blazing aura, he told himself firmly that he was finally a true martial artist. He could feel his new strength in every fiber of his body. He clenched his fist tightly. Energy gathered in his palm, crackling with intense heat. Facing the beast, he coldly declared that it was next. In front of him, the giant snake retreated, its posture shrinking as its former ferocity faded. In a flash, the protagonist charged. His fist, wrapped in blazing energy, tore through the air and slammed into the snake's head, forcing it backward in shock. Before it could recover, another explosion of power erupted upward, flinging the beast's head back violently. The snake's wound darkened as blood poured from its scales and fangs. In its agony, it clearly sensed the gap between their strengths. But the protagonist did not stop. Determination flashed in his eyes as he called out the name of his technique, Varja Fist, forcing himself to move at extreme speed. Leaping from above like lightning, his punch carried golden light and overwhelming force. But before it could land, the snake reacted swiftly, swinging its tail toward the protagonist's back while he was midair. Unable to dodge, he immediately blocked with the arm wrapped in red energy. Even so, the sheer power of the blow nearly made him cough up blood. Despite that, he did not falter. Gripping his spear tightly, he thrust it with all his strength into the snake's tail, the glowing blue blade piercing through. The ground exploded from the impact, forcing the beast to endure the full force of the attack. The battle was not over. The protagonist moved again. The energy in his fist changed. Sharper, fiercer. With a deep shout, he unleashed Thunder Rush Fist. His fist, wrapped in golden lightning, crashed down again and again, each strike accompanied by thunder and flame. Explosions of energy followed in rapid succession. The snake's body collapsed and was driven into the ground, its scales shattering apart. The beast's final scream echoed before it finally gave way, dust swallowing the surroundings. When the dust settled, the protagonist stood atop the shattered head of the giant snake. Calmly, he observed his fallen enemy as energy flickered in his hand. In his mind, his assessment was clear: even heavily injured, he could now face it head-on. At the same time, signs of his reward appeared. His martial value rose once more, another step forward on his path of ascent. After the fierce battle, the protagonist quietly sat atop the enormous corpse of the snake. Holding his knife, he scanned the surroundings. He recalled that during this time, ferocious beasts were required to have their ears cut off for exchange into money. But when he looked at the snake's body, he frowned slightly. He knew this type of beast had no ears. In the end, he sighed and decided not to waste time. Leaving the area quickly was more important. From above, one could see him walking alone out of the ravine. His small figure was gradually swallowed by the vast forest. When he reached a more open area, he stopped. Lying on the ground ahead was the body of young Master Yi, lifeless. He stood there silently, looking down. There was no emotion on his face, only cold resolve in his eyes. In his mind, the verdict was clear: given the circumstances, this fate was still too light for him. He knelt and began searching the body, rummaging through its belongings while thinking about what kind of high-level martial technique had been used against him earlier. After a while, he retrieved a small book. When he read the title, his expression changed slightly. It was a technique called Void Breaking Finger. The scene shifted. Night fell. In the depths of a silent valley, a cave glowed faintly from within. Drawing closer, flames could be seen burning at its center, illuminating the cold stone walls. Inside, the protagonist sat cross-legged, his spear resting beside him, the book open in front of him. In his mind, The assessment was clear. He had already mastered the entire introductory cultivation method of void-breaking finger. The next step was to use the system to fully grasp it quickly. As he meditated quietly, the surroundings suddenly changed. The firelight vanished, replaced by a strange blue space. Before him, a figure slowly began to form. He called out loudly for it to reveal itself. Moments later, the familiar yet mysterious figure fully appeared. In an instant, it attacked with void-breaking finger. He narrowly avoided it, but a small wound still appeared on his cheek. What followed was a fast and brutal exchange. Explosions of energy echoed repeatedly as the technique's proficiency rose steadily, from low percentages toward higher stages. But along with the surge of power came a sudden blow to his head. He staggered back, coughing violently, feeling the overwhelming pressure of the technique. In his mind, he admitted clearly, as expected of AB rank martial skill, even at the basic realm, it was enough to nearly crush his body. Even so, he was not afraid. Instead, he calmly told himself that he needed to find a real monster to test its full power. 3 days later, in the forest, a massive bear charged at him, its eyes blood red as it roared. The protagonist did not retreat. In an instant, he raised his hand and released void-breaking finger. A blue beam pierced through the bear's fur and flesh. The force sent the beast reeling as blood sprayed and its body slowly collapsed. After the battle, the protagonist stood quietly. Energy flickered at his fingertip. Satisfaction and confidence were visible on his face. He told himself clearly, he had reached the perfect level of the technique. This was the power worthy of AB rank martial skill. At the same time, the system notification appeared. Void-breaking finger had been fully mastered and reached the perfect stage. Without hesitation, he decided to return. From above, the martial artist base came into view, busy and crowded. Inside, lively discussions filled the air as people assessed their hunting gains. Some praised the Thunder Squad, saying their actions were savage and that they had slain countless beasts. When the amount, 230,000, was mentioned, many gasped in shock, recognizing it as enough to live comfortably for a long time. But suddenly, everyone's attention shifted. Not far away, a spot was surrounded by a massive crowd. Whispers spread. Apparently not a single non-ranked ferocious beast had been killed. Instead, everything brought back was Tier 1 ferocious beasts. The shock only deepened when it was revealed that several were even at the high stage. At the counter, the protagonist stood quietly, spear in hand. His gains were counted one by one. 72 Tier 1 initial stage, 83 middle stage, and 17 high stage. When the total value, 406,000 blue star coins, was announced, nearly everyone's eyes widened as the chatter intensified. Amid the noise, the protagonist frowned slightly. In his mind, he admitted he may have gone too far and drawn too much attention. If he had known, he would have held back a little. Before long, the atmosphere in the base changed abruptly. From above, commotion was visible as martial artists moved rapidly. A loud shout rang out. Was the base under attack? Someone responded that it was impossible, as many high-level martial artists were stationed there. In the midst of the tension, a man gripped a broken wall tightly. Rings on his fingers gleamed as he angrily ordered the base to be sealed. No one was to escape. He was the one in charge, Yi Qi, Yi Feng's uncle. His subordinates immediately complied. Moments later, a bespectacled man approached, visibly anxious as he asked what had happened. That was when Yi Qi's fury finally exploded. His voice trembled as he shouted that Yi Feng was dead, along with the 4 martial artists who had accompanied him. The crowd exchanged looks. Some couldn't believe it. Others whispered among themselves. Someone said, "Well done killing him. Who hasn't been robbed by Yi Feng?" Others spoke coldly, saying that if the killer had hidden their identity better, they could have lived quietly. Some even openly declared that the scourge was finally dead. Yi Qi ignored all of it. He firmly ordered that no one be allowed to leave. He explained that AB rank martial skill had been used, and since Yi Feng's body was missing, everyone had to be investigated. Among the crowd, the protagonist stood quietly, spear in hand. His face was calm. In his mind, the calculation was clear. Based on the corpses, the giant snake had definitely killed them. And this time, fate seemed to be on his side. As the space around him gradually tightened, he noticed people approaching. He thought briefly but showed no sign of panic, standing straight and steady. After a while, Yi Qi stepped forward. The crowd scattered instantly, leaving the two facing each other in the center. Yi Qi's presence was heavy, his gaze cold. He addressed the protagonist as a younger brother, saying he had heard the news and praised his achievements. Killing ferocious beasts worth over 400,000 was proof of remarkable ability. Yi Qi's secretary spoke up, confusion clearly written across his face. From his perspective, the young man standing before them was no more than a Tier 1 initial stage martial artist. And yet, that same youth had supposedly slaughtered an absurd number of ferocious beasts. It made no sense. Nothing about it aligned with logic or experience. As the silence stretched on, suspicion slowly took root. A possibility formed in his mind. What if the boy had simply picked up young Master Yi's backpack? That would explain everything. Resources far beyond his level, strength that didn't match his cultivation. With that thought, the secretary made his decision. Search him. Two subordinates stepped forward immediately. Flames flickered to life in their palms, radiating scorching heat and lethal intent. Their voices were cold as they warned him not to resist. Otherwise, they wouldn't be gentle. But before they could even get close, a sharp flash of light cut through the air. The tip of a spear stopped inches from one man's eye. He stumbled back in shock, his face drained of color. A chill ran straight down his spine. He hadn't seen the spear move. No wind up. No motion. Only the result. Then the young man spoke. His voice was calm and steady. No fear, no hesitation. He introduced himself as a student of Star City No. 1 High School, then asked plainly whether they truly intended to search him, knowing where he came from. Yi Qi fell silent. The principal of Star City No. 1 High was infamous for fiercely protecting his students. Crossing that line would invite serious consequences. Yet at the same time, this boy was undeniably suspicious. If he truly had killed that many ferocious beasts, then he was a rare genius. And offending someone like that would bring far greater losses than gains. In the end, Yi Qi raised his hand and stopped his men. Stepping forward, his expression grim and his voice heavy with anger, he explained the situation. His nephew had been attacked. And worse, their family's martial arts technique had been stolen. No matter what, the culprit had to be found. He hoped the young man would cooperate. The response came quietly but firmly. The boy hoped he wouldn't be accused without evidence. As compensation for the search, Yi Qi offered 10,000. Without hesitation, the boy countered. 30,000. Inside, he remained completely calm. Yi Feng had died at the jaws of a giant python. And as long as the martial arts technique wasn't found, there was nothing linking the crime back to him. After a brief pause, Yi Qi agreed. They searched him thoroughly. Every item, every corner. Time passed. Nothing. Yi Qi ordered the payment delivered and allowed him to leave. As he walked away, the boy let out a quiet breath of relief. Thankfully, all traces had been cleaned. Otherwise, today would have ended very differently. Still, the investigation wasn't over. Yi Qi ordered his men to continue searching the area. Until all suspicion was cleared, no one was allowed to leave. Meanwhile, the boy planned his next steps. First, he needed to clean himself, wash away the blood and dust, change clothes. Then, he would head to the Martial Artist Association for assessment and registration. He needed a guidance technique, and he needed it fast. But he couldn't afford to waste time. He headed to the martial artist base subordinate hotel. Inside his room, he checked his condition, and the system panel appeared before his eyes. Martial value. 534. He froze. He hadn't realized it had accumulated to this level. Over the past few days, he had focused entirely on perfecting void-breaking finger and hunting ferocious beasts non-stop. He hadn't even checked his martial value until now. His stats appeared. Name: Su Hong. Vitality: 103. Spirit: 23. Physique: mortal body 6%. All of his martial techniques: void-breaking finger, raging sea spear technique, thunder rush fist, vajra fist, floating light palm, and void step, were at perfect level. The system standards were clear. Tier 1 initial stage required 100 vitality. Tier 1 middle stage required 200. If he invested everything into vitality, he could raise it by over 50 points, only a little more and he'd reach the middle stage. But something caught his attention. He hadn't upgraded spirit or mortal body yet. Unsure of their true combat effects, but with plenty of martial value to spare, he decided to test them. He upgraded spirit first. Nothing dramatic happened. No explosion of power. Just a subtle clarity, a sharper mind, smoother thoughts. Then, he upgraded mortal body. Everything changed. A heavy, solid power surged through his entire body. His muscles tightened. His presence deepened. His physical form felt denser, more real. This wasn't just strength, but a transformation at the foundation of his body. The updated stats appeared. Vitality increased. Spirit increased. Mortal body increased. After a moment of thought, he stopped upgrading mortal body. He allocated 200 points to vitality, and the remaining martial value to spirit. The moment he confirmed, crimson energy erupted from his body. The room filled with overwhelming pressure. Power surged through every inch of him, making each movement feel weighted with explosive strength. After several moments, the energy finally settled. He exhaled. If he had turned into a walking mass of muscle, he wouldn't even know how to explain it. An hour later, he left for the Star City Martial Artist Association. He registered for assessment. A staff member guided him inside, noting how young he was and asking if this was his first test. Along the way, the standards were explained. 100 vitality and 1000 combat power to pass as a Tier 1 martial artist. Whispers followed behind him. No master. Came alone. Probably just testing himself. No one paid much attention, until the test began. Candidates entered one by one. Some failed. Some passed. Then a name was called. Li Ming. Vitality: 105. Passed. He stepped up for the combat power test and threw a punch. 1763 combat power. The hall erupted. That level nearly reached Tier 1 middle stage, extremely rare. Someone asked if he was a disciple of Raging Thunder Dojo. The answer became obvious. If so, then he had to be Zhang Ming's student. That explained his smooth movements, and the Thunder Rush Fist, a legendary technique. Su Hong frowned slightly. He only knew of one disciple, Li Yan. How many did Zhang Ming have? As Li Ming passed him, he smiled faintly. You're next. But his gaze was cold. In his mind, the comparison was laughable. He was a genius. Young, powerful. The boy before him didn't belong in the same league. When Su Hong's vitality was measured, chaos broke out. Some thought the detector was broken. Then the result was announced. 123 vitality. Passed. Li Ming's eyes widened. Shock flickered across his face, but he quickly suppressed it. Vitality meant nothing. Combat power was everything. When Su Hong stepped forward, he felt it clearly. He had already advanced. His physique had been upgraded. Every movement carried explosive strength. He calculated carefully. 40% strength should be enough, but what if it wasn't? In the end, he used 50%. He punched. A thunderous boom echoed through the hall. The detector was sent flying, smashing into the wall. Everyone froze. Li Ming went cold. One punch. No martial skill, and the detector was blown away. The result appeared. 3004 combat power. Shock exploded through the hall. That number surpassed Tier 1 high stage. It was beyond imagination. A staff member shouted from above, "It was that kid again." The instructor immediately understood. News spread fast. Inside the Star City Martial Dao Association, President Wu Lingxian cursed under his breath. Once again, Yang City had produced a monster. If Star City failed to produce geniuses of its own, his position was at risk. Then a subordinate rushed in, panic-stricken. A monster had appeared in the assessment. A Tier 1 initial stage martial artist. With 3,000 combat power, relying solely on physical strength. Wu Lingxian's expression changed completely. He was utterly stunned. Inside the central hall of the Martial Artists Association, a male staff member approached the protagonist and politely explained that he needed to be taken to the second floor first. There, he would be officially recorded as a martial artist before receiving his monthly allowance. The protagonist quietly thanked him and prepared to follow. But before they could take a single step, a cold yet authoritative voice suddenly spoke. "I'll take care of him." The staff member froze. The moment he heard that voice, he immediately recognized who it was. The speaker was none other than the president herself. From the second floor stood a woman with long, golden hair gently lifted by the breeze. Her gaze fell on the protagonist as she asked calmly if he was Su Hong, then introduced herself as the president of the Star City branch of the Martial Artists Association. Wu Lingxian. She motioned for him to follow. The protagonist simply nodded. Deep down, he hadn't expected the association's president, someone rumored to be a Tier 5 martial artist, to possess such an overwhelming presence. Once inside her office, she asked whether he was a student at Star City No. 1 High School. Wu Lingxian mentioned that the old man Li Chengshan had once complained to her. This year, the school had produced only 2 ordinary Tier 1 martial artists. What he didn't know, however, was that a truly extraordinary talent had been hiding there all along. The protagonist grew even more confused about why he had been summoned personally. He explained that he had only come to register, collect his allowance, and receive a guidance technique. Wu Lingxian waved it off calmly. His martial artist ID and monthly allowance had already been processed downstairs. As for the guidance technique, she would teach it to him herself. Standing in front of him, she asked how deep his understanding of guidance techniques was. The protagonist answered honestly. Based on textbooks, heavenly and earthly spiritual keys had different attributes, and guidance techniques were used to absorb them to strengthen the body. He added that the technique had to match the type of spiritual key being absorbed. Wu Lingxian smiled. The textbook explanation wasn't wrong, but it was incomplete. She explained that guidance techniques weren't only for cultivation. As an example, she demonstrated her heavenly fire guidance technique. A small flame appeared in her palm. When she clenched her fist, roaring flames wrapped around it. She explained that the technique primarily absorbed fire attribute spiritual keys. Not only did it strengthen the body, it also infused attacks with fire attribute lethality. Once the attribute could be released externally, attack range increased as well. With a swift wave of her hand, she unleashed a powerful stream of flames forward. She then added that for most martial artists, merely leaving a faint trace of attribute power in an attack was already considered outstanding. The protagonist was stunned. He had always believed guidance techniques were only for absorbing spiritual keys. The textbooks never mentioned that they could be used directly in combat. Wu Lingxian continued, explaining that heavenly and earthly spiritual keys possessed 7 attributes: mental, wood, water, fire, earth, lightning, and wind. Each differed in strength. Lightning ranked highest in raw offensive power, followed by mental, then fire. However, which guidance technique one could cultivate depended entirely on compatibility. She then picked up a red crystal from her desk. That was when the protagonist realized, guidance techniques couldn't be chosen freely. Holding the crystal, Wu Lingxian explained that it was used to measure compatibility. The brighter the crystal glowed, the higher the compatibility. Most martial artists ranged between 20% and 30%. She herself had around 80%, already considered extremely high. She expected a genius like him to exceed 90%. When the protagonist took the crystal, he thought to himself that if someone like her, who reached Tier 5 at a young age, only had 80%, then reaching 70% would already be an achievement. But the next moment, the crystal burst into brilliant red light. Wu Ling Xian's eyes widened as the entire crystal nearly filled with light, illuminating the office. She could hardly believe it. 100% fire attribute compatibility. She immediately explained what it meant. He could absorb the entire fire attribute spiritual key with zero waste. By comparison, her 80% compatibility meant losing 20% every time she absorbed energy. And yet, she was still a Tier 5 martial artist and president of the association. That meant his potential would far surpass hers. She never imagined that a small city like Star City could produce a talent rivaling the geniuses of the imperial capital, Magic City. As the protagonist stared at the crystal, a new thought surfaced. Fire was powerful, but he preferred lightning. At that instant, the crystal shone again, this time with a dazzling golden glow. Both of them froze. After a moment, the protagonist said quietly that his lightning attribute compatibility also seemed to be 100%. Wu Ling Xian couldn't speak. Her eyes nearly went blank. Dual attributes, fire and lightning, both at full compatibility. She wondered what kind of monster stood before her. But it wasn't over. Wind attribute appeared next, also perfect. One by one, the results came in. All 7 attributes. All at 100%. Wu Ling Xian slowly sank into her chair, shock written across her face. She remembered a time when she herself had been considered a top-tier genius. Becoming a Tier 5 martial artist at 30 was already extremely rare. Yet compared to an existence that defied all logic, she realized she was merely ordinary. To face a being beyond logic, only another being beyond logic could stand against it. For the protagonist, 7 perfect attributes were both a blessing and a burden. Choosing only lightning and abandoning the rest felt like an unbearable waste. So he requested copies of the guidance techniques for all 7 attributes. Wu Ling Xian was stunned. After a moment, she warned him seriously. Human energy was limited. Even with immense talent, focusing on 1 or 2 attributes was far wiser. She recalled someone who once attempted to cultivate all 7 techniques at once. After decades, he remained stuck at Tier 1. But the protagonist was firm. He wasn't ready to choose yet. He wanted to try everything first. With no other choice, Wu Ling Xian agreed, while warning him not to squander such rare talent. She then mentioned the upcoming monthly school exam. Tensions at the All-Heaven battlefield were rising, and a massive war between the 10,000 races and humanity could erupt at any moment. Because of this, nations were investing heavily in a genius training camp. She wanted to recommend him. If he took first place in the school exam, he would qualify automatically. Hearing about the 10,000 races war, memories surfaced, more than a decade ago, when he lost all his relatives except his uncle and aunt. His resolve hardened. He would grow stronger. He would never allow such tragedy to happen again. When he returned home, he happily told his uncle and aunt that he was now an official martial artist. They were overwhelmed with joy, nearly in tears. He explained that a Tier 1 martial artist received a 10,000 monthly allowance, meaning his uncle no longer had to work himself to exhaustion. They called him the pillar of the family. The protagonist took a deep breath. From now on, they were safe. At midnight, he tested the guidance technique. Sitting quietly, he circulated his energy. His eyes faintly glowed. He punched the air, and a small flicker appeared around his fist. But instead of flames, only smoke emerged. He frowned. Was this the basic level? Why did it feel so weak? Then a notification appeared. He had successfully learned the guidance technique. When he checked it, it was only level 1. That was when a realization struck him. If it had levels, then perhaps this guidance technique was something only he could upgrade further. As the protagonist stared at the system interface, he still couldn't fully understand how guidance techniques were supposed to be upgraded. He tried using martial value the same way he did with his other skills, but a warning immediately appeared. His martial value was insufficient. Seeing that, he decided not to force the issue. Instead of rushing, it would be better to focus on cultivation first, master all the guidance techniques, and only then look for ways to earn more martial value. With that decision made, he entered cultivation. He studied all the guidance techniques at the same time, and almost instantly, a fierce, blazing aura erupted from his body. Hours passed, and one by one, the thunder guidance technique, water marsh guidance technique, thick earth guidance technique, and spirit wind guidance technique all reached level 1. Inside his body, 7 different forms of spiritual keys now coexisted. However, it was immediately obvious that they rejected one another. At that moment, he finally understood what President Wu had once said. There were geniuses in the past who had cultivated 7 techniques at once, yet remained stuck at tier 1 for decades. As the violent energy burned through him, pain surged across his body. Veins bulged beneath his skin, and sweat poured down his face. Although all 7 attributes existed within him, he could only activate one at a time. The moment he tried to draw on a second attribute, the two clashed violently, canceling each other out until they dissipated completely. A blazing red flame burst forth from his palm, but only for an instant before it exploded and vanished. When he focused again, lightning-based energy surged out instead. He frowned. Lightning and fire were naturally similar attributes. Was it really impossible to fuse them? He tried again. The energy detonated once more and disappeared. He cursed under his breath, but he didn't give up. Again and again, he repeated the process. Time slipped by until dawn approached. His breathing grew heavy, his body drenched in sweat, his hands trembling from exhaustion. Yet he continued. Lightning surged out once more. This time, he forcefully guided the flames to merge with it. Energy erupted outward in a violent wave as he shouted and held on with everything he had. And finally, he succeeded. After an entire night of relentless attempts, he managed to fuse lightning and fire into a single force. Without wasting any time, he decided to test its power in real conditions and immediately headed out. The scene shifted to the Star City Martial Arts Square. This time, he deliberately chose a Tier 3 combat power tester, unwilling to repeat the incident where he had destroyed a machine before. In the past, using only 50% of his strength, he had already reached 3000 combat power. Now, he limited himself to 30%. When he threw his punch, the result shocked him, over 2300 combat power. By his estimate, it should have been around 1800, but it had exceeded that by nearly 500. If pure lightning alone could do this, then what about lightning combined with fire? Energy gathered in his palm once more. When he struck again, the tester shook violently. The number surged upward. Over 3000. He couldn't help smiling as he stared at his hand. With the combined thunder-fire attribute and his physical strength, even at 30% output, he had already surpassed a high-stage Tier 1 martial artist. Yet his vitality was only 123. To him, that level of potential was terrifying. And this was with only 2 attributes. What would happen if he combined all 7? As he watched lightning crackle and flames swirl in his palm, he made a decision. He would return and attempt to fuse 3 attributes next. The scene shifted to the rooftop of his home. After countless intense attempts, he lay there shirtless, staring at the sky. Reviewing the system interface, he realized just how difficult it was to merge 3 attributes, several times harder than combining 2. No matter how many times he adjusted and experimented, there was no clear progress. That was when it hit him. Perhaps the issue wasn't his control, but the level of his guidance techniques. He checked the interface again. All of them were still stuck at level 1. But the monthly exam was already the next day. For now, he needed to gather more martial value. The next morning, Star City No. 1 High School was packed with students. The principal announced that today's exam would be different. Due to rising tensions on the front lines, an annual training camp would be established to select geniuses for intensive cultivation. The training camp offered overwhelming resources, martial arts manuals, pills, and even grandmasters as instructors. The top 3 students in this exam would earn a spot in Star City's training camp. The students exploded with excitement. It was a genius training camp. Someone even whispered that one of the instructors was a Tier 7 grandmaster, almost unbelievable, especially since the principal himself was only Tier 3. Ambition ignited across the crowd. The protagonist, however, focused on one key detail. Only top 3 would qualify. Simply ranking high wasn't enough. From behind him, a friend approached and shared shocking news. Chen Shan and Li Tu had both broken through to Tier 1. Many students had reached the basic level of Thunder Rush Fist. He had been absent for 10 days, and during that time, breakthroughs had happened one after another. There were even rumors that the principal had arranged special training for gifted students. Chen Shan and Li Tu now both had vitality above 100, and their Thunder Rush attacks had already produced 3 echoes. Chen Shan arrogantly told Li Tu he would prove who the real best was. Li Tu fired back, saying that after he smashed Chen Shan into the ground, he hoped he'd still be so confident. As the principal stepped down from the stage, an instructor approached and asked whether they had found the genius who possessed the 9 Echo Thunder Rush Fist. The principal replied that he had searched everywhere these past few days and believed that person was not a student of number 1 high school. Before they could continue, a group approached. The man at the center spoke mockingly, asking why the principal looked like he'd been abandoned by his wife. It was Zhang Ming. The principal frowned and demanded to know why Zhang Ming was on campus. Zhang Ming casually replied that the quality of students this year didn't look very impressive. He brought along 2 disciples and jokingly asked if the school's first-place students would like to spar after the exam. The principal cursed inwardly. This was clearly an attempt to humiliate him. But if he refused, it would be the same as admitting his school had no talent. Before he could respond, Zhang Ming added that he would understand if the principal declined. After all, the students looked weak. The instructor beside the principal snapped back, asking if Zhang Ming was looking for trouble. The conversation abruptly stopped when someone whispered into Zhang Ming's ear and pointed toward the protagonist. Zhang Ming turned and saw the young man standing calmly among the students, smiling faintly. In Zhang Ming's eyes, this boy was a small monster. So he was from number 1 high school after all. Zhang Ming cursed silently and signaled his 2 disciples. He knew that if they faced this boy, defeat was guaranteed. Rather than embarrass himself, he chose to retreat. Laughing, Zhang Ming said he had only been joking. There was no competition at all. How could his 2 useless disciples be compared to the principal's students? His disciples immediately echoed the sentiment, pretending to surrender. The principal and instructor burned with anger. Soon after, the competition officially began. The first match was announced. Number 665, Cheng Peng, versus number 666, Su Hong. As both stepped onto the stage, the protagonist's friend grew nervous. Cheng Peng was a quasi-martial artist, famous for his strength. The teacher beside him shouted a warning, telling Su Hong not to force it. Getting injured wasn't worth it. Before the fight began, Cheng Peng smirked and asked whether Su Hong would fall on his own, or be smashed into the ground. In the next instant, Su Hong vanished. Before anyone could react, he reappeared behind Cheng Peng, grabbed him with one hand, and slammed him brutally into the floor. The arena fell silent. The friend and teacher stared in shock, cursing under their breath. They couldn't comprehend when Su Hong had become this strong. A single move. Instant defeat. As the dust settled, Su Hong stood alone at the center of the stage. His expression calm. His gaze cold. The protagonist won his next match, and this time the entire arena nearly shook from the roar of the crowd. The spectators could not hide their shock and admiration. Some openly questioned how he had grown so strong in such a short period of time. One voice even shouted whether he had already stepped into the ranks of a Tier 1 martial artist. Within moments, conversations about him spread to every corner of the arena. His next fight would be the final. At the side of the stage, the instructor could not help but ask the principal where this student had suddenly come from. During private tutoring sessions, he had never noticed anything remarkable. He could not recall a single moment when the boy displayed this level of talent. The principal admitted that it was his own failure as head of the school. How had he not discovered such an outstanding seed earlier? By not prioritizing his development, he had nearly buried a talent that should have been nurtured much sooner. The instructor fell into thought. There was something familiar about the boy's presence, as if he had seen him somewhere before, yet he could not remember when or where. Their attention soon shifted to the semifinal between Chen Shan and Li Tu. The principal commented that the outcome would soon be decided. Their strengths were nearly equal, making it difficult to predict who would prevail. On stage, they exchanged relentless blows, fists colliding as energy clashed again and again. In the middle of the fight, Li Tu shouted that both of them knew the 3 Echo Thunder Rush Fist. If Chen Shan refused to use his ultimate move, he should stop dreaming about winning. Li Tu immediately unleashed Thunder Rush Fist. The strike echoed through the air, and Chen Shan met it head-on. At the same time, flames gathered in Chen Shan's other hand as he confidently declared that everyone should watch carefully because he was the true number one of the school. The students watching were stunned. Chen Shan had achieved attribute externalization, and it was the fire attribute, second only to thunder in offensive power. But Li Tu simply smiled and condensed energy into his own fist. He said calmly that attribute externalization was nothing special. Who could not do that? The crowd was shocked again. Li Tu also displayed attribute externalization, and his was the metal attribute, which held even greater combat power than fire. As he continued pressing forward with consecutive punches, he revealed that he had also mastered the 5 Echo Thunder Rush Fist. Chen Shan's eyes widened in shock, and before he could react, the 5 Echo Thunder Rush Fist struck him directly. 5 heavy echoes rang out before he was knocked to the ground. The principal could not believe that Li Tu had been hiding the 5 Echo Thunder Rush Fist all along. The instructor added that in less than 10 days, Li Tu had not only mastered attribute externalization but had also pushed Thunder Rush Fist to the micro level. His talent was undeniably impressive. The principal quietly remarked that there was no longer any need to watch the final. With a micro-level Thunder Rush Fist and metal attribute, how could the protagonist possibly defeat Li Tu? The instructor felt regret. If only the protagonist had learned a guidance technique and Thunder Rush Fist, he might have stood a chance. At that moment, Zhang Ming suddenly approached and proposed a bet with the principal. He was willing to stake 50,000 on the protagonist becoming champion and asked whether they would join. The principal questioned whether he had lost his mind. Even if the protagonist was strong, he did not possess a guidance technique. What could he rely on? However, the instructor cut in and said that if Zhang Ming personally delivered the money, he would accept the wager. Hours later, the final match was announced. Number 1 Li Tu versus number 666 Su Hong, the protagonist. Before the match began, the protagonist's friend shouted for him to win the championship and not embarrass them. As Li Tu gathered energy into his fist, he said that the protagonist had only been lucky to avoid facing him or Chen Shan earlier, allowing him to slip into the final. The protagonist did not respond. He calmly adjusted his clothes and thought that after hunting countless ferocious beasts, these students felt far too weak. At last, there was someone worthy of fighting. Li Tu arrogantly declared that since the protagonist had reached the final, he could consider himself number 2 in the school. The protagonist asked who number 1 was. Without answering, Li Tu moved immediately. He prepared a powerful attack and stated that he was naturally number 1. One move would be enough to show the difference between them. He unleashed the 5 Echo Thunder Rush Fist. 5 echoes reverberated through the air. The students were alarmed. Once Thunder Rush Fist was used, the match should have been over. The protagonist was certain to lose. Before the attack could land, the protagonist's eyes flashed with golden light. His fist ignited with energy as he decided to test the limits of his physical body. The crowd shouted in disbelief. He did not dodge. He chose to face the attack head-on. They even called out for the referee to stop the fight. But every echo of Li Tu's attack was met by the protagonist's powerful punches. The final clash sent intense pressure spreading across the arena. Li Tu was stunned. The 5 Echo Thunder Rush Fist had been neutralized purely by physical strength. He attacked again with the same technique, and once more the protagonist countered it with raw force. Li Tu began to question whether he was facing a monster. The teacher standing beside the protagonist's friend was equally shocked. The protagonist had not used any martial skill, yet he stood evenly against someone wielding 5 Echo Thunder Rush Fist. The friend muttered that the protagonist's strength was frightening. The instructor concluded that he must possess a special physique. Otherwise, such overwhelming physical power would be impossible. The principal felt a surge of excitement. Their school had produced a genius with a special body. However, the instructor reminded him that Li Tu had already condensed his attribute. The protagonist still had no clear advantage. The two fighters briefly separated. Li Tu shouted in anger, releasing a powerful presence while gathering energy in both fists. He warned the protagonist not to be arrogant because only he would win. As he charged forward again, he demanded that the protagonist accept defeat. The protagonist let out a quiet breath. He had only wanted to test how far he could go with physical strength alone. But he decided it was enough. His true power erupted. Golden lightning wrapped around his clenched fist. Since Li Tu had attacked with full force, he would respond with equal respect. He dashed forward, his fist blazing with golden lightning. Li Tu's expression changed instantly. The protagonist had achieved attribute externalization, and it was thunder. The principal and instructor were visibly shocked when they realized not only was it thunder attribute, but the protagonist had also mastered thunder guidance technique. A special physique combined with the most destructive attribute was truly terrifying. Their fists collided. The stage thundered under the impact as pressure spread outward. Li Tu could hardly believe that the protagonist's thunder attribute was even stronger than his own metal attribute. With a faint tone of mockery, the protagonist said that since Li Tu had shown his ultimate move, he would show his as well. Golden light filled his eyes. Lightning surged around his fist. Thunder Rush Fist. 9 consecutive echoes exploded into the air. The attack struck Li Tu's entire body and sent him flying. He turned pale as blood spilled from his mouth. 9 Echo Thunder Rush Fist. How was that even possible? He crashed heavily onto the stage, and the arena fell silent. Moments later, the crowd erupted in deafening cheers. They could not believe that the protagonist had won. They could not believe that 9 Echo Thunder Rush Fist had reached a perfected state. To some, it was God tier. His Thunder Rush Fist was even more ferocious than that of the instructor who taught them. The instructor grabbed the principal's shoulder as realization dawned. This was the genius they had once seen and nearly overlooked. The principal smiled with pride and said that he was not merely a genius. He was a dragon of Star City No. 1 High School. The instructor remarked that once such a monster entered the training camp, the so-called geniuses from powerful backgrounds would face a serious challenge. A creature like this did not belong in a small pond. When wind and clouds gathered, it would become a dragon. The principal declared that in the training camp, the protagonist would rise from the depths and soar into the sky. In the imperial capital of Magic City and even on the battlefield of 10,000 races, that was where a monster of this level would truly shine.
When the afternoon faded and the sun finally dipped below the horizon, the protagonist returned home. The sky still carried a faint orange glow, and the neighborhood was quiet. As soon as he stepped inside, he greeted his uncle and aunt and told them he was back. He carefully set his bag on the table before turning to face them. His uncle immediately asked how the monthly exam had gone. There was hope in his voice, though he tried not to sound too anxious. The protagonist gave a small smile and answered in a simple tone that he had placed first. For a moment, his uncle fell silent. Then a proud smile slowly spread across his face. He repeated the words, "First place," several times, as if trying to confirm he had heard correctly. His aunt could not hide her happiness either. His uncle then remembered the training camp that had been mentioned before and asked if this meant he had officially secured a spot. The protagonist nodded. Before their conversation could continue, a loud knock came from the door. All three of them were surprised, and his uncle went to open it. A woman stood outside and introduced herself as Lin Yan's mother, a classmate of the protagonist. She did not waste time. She explained that only the top 3 students could enter the training camp, and her son had ranked 4th. She wanted to discuss whether the protagonist would be willing to give up his slot. In exchange, she offered 30,000. The house grew quiet. No one answered immediately. Seeing their hesitation, the woman continued. She said the training camp was not an ordinary program. The competition was intense. Participants could be seriously injured, and some never returned. The students there used high-grade pills and had access to advanced martial skills. Considering the protagonist's family situation, she suggested it would be wiser for him to step back while he still could. Hearing this, his aunt became visibly worried. She asked him if the training camp was truly that dangerous. He did not respond right away. Instead, his uncle looked at him seriously and asked whether he could take responsibility for his own safety and for this decision. The protagonist answered firmly that he could. The woman was displeased and said the family was placing too much trust in a child's words. His uncle calmly replied that it was the protagonist's decision, and they believed in him. If they could not trust their own family, there would be no reason to trust a stranger. They asked her to leave. As she walked away, she warned them to wait and see when he was eliminated from the training camp. After the door closed, the protagonist admitted he had not told them every detail about the risks because he did not want them to worry too much. His uncle said that was fine and that they would support whatever choice he made. His aunt reminded him that rankings and victories were not the most important things. What mattered was that he stayed safe. He nodded in agreement. That night, he went up to the rooftop and quietly looked over the city lights. Even though his uncle and aunt had said they supported him, he knew they were still worried. If he wanted them to feel at ease, he needed to be better prepared. He opened his status window. From the monthly exam, he had earned a total of 285 martial value points across more than a dozen fights. However, his mortal body was only at 36.1%. Compared to other participants in the training camp, many of them likely had stronger foundations. He decided to upgrade his mortal body. As the percentage increased, he felt intense pressure throughout his body. Every muscle seemed to be reforged from within. After some time, it reached 64.6%. He was drenched in sweat and breathing heavily, but he knew it was still not enough. There were more than 30% left before completion, and he wondered what kind of transformation would happen once it reached 100. He also noticed that both the Thunder Guidance Technique and the Heavenly Flame Guidance Technique had reached level 2. Since there was still room on his panel, he continued cultivating. In one hand, blazing flames appeared. In the other, crackling lightning. He trained quietly until dawn. When the sun rose, a new notification appeared. Both techniques had advanced to level 3, and his vitality had increased by 3 points. He had not expected such progress from continuous practice alone, and his determination grew even stronger. The next morning, before leaving, his uncle and aunt walked him to the door. His aunt reminded him to be careful and not to force himself beyond his limits. His uncle joked that he should bring home another first place. The protagonist smiled and said goodbye. As he walked away, his aunt noticed her husband's hand trembling slightly. When she asked if he was worried, he quietly replied that he simply did not want the boy to feel his concern. While the protagonist walked down the street, a red car suddenly stopped in front of him. President Wu Lingxian of the Star City Martial Dao Association stepped out and invited him inside. During the drive, the president explained that he only wanted to give a few reminders about the training camp. Some participants were already at Tier 1 high stage and close to Tier 2. A few even possessed B-rank martial skills. The protagonist listened silently. He knew Tier 2 required 200 vitality points, meaning some participants were nearly there. However, he was not too concerned about B-rank skills. With the help of the system space, he believed he could catch up through effort. President Wu Lingxian said that among all the talents he had seen, the protagonist's potential was the strongest. But compared to others, he lacked resources. If he experienced setbacks at the training camp, he should not let them discourage him. One day, he would surpass the rest. The protagonist thanked him and said he understood. The president could see that the boy was fully aware of his shortcomings, yet remained calm and steady. There was no hesitation in his eyes. As the car moved forward, it was clear that his determination would carry him into the next stage of his trials.
The scene shifts to the Tianlin mountain range, where a car winds slowly up narrow, twisting roads toward the peaks. Inside sit the protagonist, the school's headmaster, and 2 companions, Chen Shan and Li Tu. The pair is shocked to learn the training camp will be held deep in the range, a place notorious for swarms of fierce beasts. The principal assures them not to worry. A grandmaster leads the camp, so lives are rarely at risk. The protagonist thinks quietly to himself. He knows the range spans dozens of cities, including Star City and Yang City. Not only is spiritual power thick in the air there, but the beasts are far more dangerous than anywhere else. Some are strong enough to match Tier 7 grandmasters. Even low-level Tier 1 beasts on the range's outskirts are deadlier than normal, and most Tier 2 fighters wouldn't dare enter alone. As the car pushes deeper into the forest, pairs of glowing red eyes watch from the shadows. Chen Shan and Li Tu feel a prickling unease, like something is staring at them from the dark. They wonder aloud if a beast might attack at any moment. The protagonist smiles slightly. To him, the competition at camp will likely be as brutal as the mountain's beasts, and instead of being nervous, he feels a rush of excitement. When they reach the campgrounds, dozens of participants are already gathered. As they walk through the crowd, Li Tu notices the powerful presence of several people nearby. But when some of those participants turn to look, their auras dark and menacing, both he and Chen Shan fall silent, their faces full of surprise. The protagonist just smiles and tells them to keep walking. Before they can enter fully, a camp official steps in front of them. Wait until everyone arrives, he says. The entrance assessment starts only when all are here. The protagonist asks about the assessment, but before the official can answer, someone shouts, "The noble clans are here." A line of luxury cars pulls up to the entrance. One by one, fighters from wealthy families step out. A few people cry out when they see Lady Xiao Nan, known across the region for her skill and striking appearance. Next comes Lin Xing of the Lin clan, said to be on the verge of reaching Tier 2 strength. Also present is Wang Tiantu, the city lord's son and nicknamed the Berserker King. He has a 95% affinity for fire and a unique, powerful physique. They walk inside, followed by their personal attendants. The protagonist watches them closely. He suspects these are the top prodigies of Starhaven City, he'd heard about from the president, and he's eager to see how strong they really are. Once everyone is assembled, the official steps forward to explain the rules. The actual training camp lies 18 miles, about 30 kilometers, inside the Iron Peak range. Tokens have been placed inside the bodies of select beasts, only those who retrieve a token will be allowed into the camp. Li Tu leans over to Chen Shan and whispers, "Walking 18 miles in 8 hours sounds easy enough, but this is the Tianline mountain range. The deeper we go, the stronger the beasts get, one wrong step could kill us." The protagonist isn't worried, 8 hours is more than enough time, he thinks. He might even hunt a few extra beasts to earn combat points. A participant calls out, "What if we run into a beast stronger than us?" The official shrugs. "Consider yourself unlucky. Help will come if you're about to die." The crowd erupts in anger, "That's not fair." They shout. The strong might get killed by chance, while weak fighters could pass just by luck. Some agree, especially those who feel they're relying on fortune to make it through. The official glares at them. "This isn't a game," he says sharply. "You've spent over 10 years training," he continues. "But one passing expert could still wipe you out in seconds. When you reach the all-heaven battlefield, will you complain about fairness there too? If you don't want to face high-tier beasts, move carefully. Avoiding danger, preying on the weak, using your strength, or ganging up on fewer opponents, that's how battlefields work." One participant nods in agreement. "If you're scared of dying, just quit now," he says, mocking others. "Don't waste everyone's time. You've been acting like cowards all day, you're nothing but a pile of trash." A young man flares up, clearly the target of the insult. He steps forward, repeating the words. The mocker smirks. "Cowardly trash. If you don't believe me, come at me, I'll flatten you like a bug." The official cuts in. "No fighting on campgrounds. But once you're in the mountains, we won't interfere. Steal tokens, beat someone up just because you don't like their face, do whatever you want." The two men lock eyes, tension crackling between them. The protagonist watches and thinks, "This camp is ruthless, they practically encourage fighting. At least half the people here will be eliminated. If I fight these guys, I could earn a lot of combat points." A timer buzzes, and the official claps his hands. "Enough arguing. The assessment starts now, move out." At his signal, the crowd sprints into the forest, shouting declarations of determination to pass. A short while later, the two men who'd argued are still chasing each other. The one behind yells, "Come here, you coward. I'll make you roll all the way back to the start." The man ahead shouts back, "If you want to be eliminated early, I'll be happy to oblige." They gather energy in their fists, screaming that they'll kill each other, then unleash powerful punches that send shockwaves through the air. Blow after blow lands, creating a deafening roar. The protagonist from a tree branch above. He'd hoped to see what the so-called prodigies could do, but they're nowhere near as skilled as the stories claimed. Even if he beat them, he wouldn't gain much in martial value points. He decides to hurry ahead and hunt some high-level beasts instead. Before he can leave, he hears the two men shouting again. "Commoners will always be commoners. What's the point of working hard when you can't match my family's centuries of power?" The other man snarls back, "Shut up. Don't lump me in with your common trash." The words hit the protagonist hard. He thinks to himself, "I can't let this chance for martial value points slip away." He drops down from the tree and steps between the two fighters. "How about you two fight me instead?" he says. He holds a thick wooden staff in one hand. One of the men stares, then laughs mockingly. "Another commoner. Watch your step, you'll end up just as beaten as he will be." The other asks, what rank are you, anyway? You think you can just butt into our fight? The protagonist shakes his head. You've got it wrong. I mean, what if you two stopped fighting each other and teamed up to take me on? Without hesitation, the first man charges forward, screaming, how dare you look down on me? Are you asking to die? Before he can reach the protagonist, a knee slams into his torso with explosive force. The man cries out in shock and flies backward, slamming into a massive tree trunk. He slumps against it, barely conscious. The second man freezes, stunned. He'd thought his rival was as strong as he was, yet he'd been taken down in one move. When he turns back to the protagonist, his eyes widen at how quickly the fighter moves. The protagonist readies his staff and says calmly, your turn. The man can't speak as the staff swings toward his face. There's a loud crack, and blood and teeth spray from the impact.
The chapter ends here. Watch out for our upcoming uploads. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you'll always be updated on our future videos.